Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, also known as Scipio the African, Scipio Africanus-Major, Scipio Africanus the Elder, and Scipio the Great, was a Roman general and later consul who was often regarded as one of the greatest generals and military strategists of all time. His main achievements were during the Second Punic War, where he is best known for defeating Hannibal at the final battle at Zama, one of the feats that earned him the agnomen Africanus. Although considered a hero by the general Roman populace, primarily for his contributions in the struggle against the Carthaginians, Scipio was reviled by other patricians of his day. In his later years, he was tried for bribery and treason, unfounded charges that were only meant to discredit him before the public. Disillusioned by the ingratitude of his peers, Scipio left Rome and withdrew from public life. Biography. Early years. Publius Cornelius Scipio was born by Caesarian section into the Scipio branch of the Cornelia gens. His birth year is calculated from statements made by ancient historians of how old he was when certain events in his life occurred, and must have been 235–236 BC, usually stated as circa 236 BC. The Cornelii were one of 6 major patrician families, along with the Manlii, the Fabii, the Aemilii, the Claudii, and the Valerii, with a record of successful public service in the highest offices extending back at least to the early Roman Republic. Scipio's great-grandfather Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus and grandfather Lucius Cornelius Scipio had both been consuls and censors. He was the eldest son of the consul Publius Cornelius Scipio by his wife Pomponia, daughter of plebeian consul Manius Pomponius Matho. Early military service. At an early age, Scipio joined the Roman struggle against Carthage in the Second Punic War. At some point, he is said to have promised his father to continue the struggle against Carthage all his life, showing similar dedication to that of his enemy, Hannibal. The young Scipio survived the disastrous battles at Tisnus, Trebia, and Cannae. According to Polybius, he saved his father's life when he was 18, by charging the encircling force alone with reckless daring. At the Battle of Tisnus, Scipio's would-be father-in-law Lucius Aemilius Paulus was killed in 216 BC at the Battle of Cannae. Despite these defeats at the hands of the Carthaginians, Scipio remained focused on securing Roman victory. Scipio was never again to see a Roman force defeated, for once given command at the age of 25 he never lost a battle. According to legend, after the disastrous Battle of Cannae, and on hearing that Lucius Caecilius Metellus and other politicians were at the point of surrendering Rome to Hannibal and the Carthaginians, Scipio and his supporters stormed into the meeting, and at sword point he forced all present to swear that they would continue in faithful service to Rome. Fortunately, the Roman Senate was of like mind and refused to entertain thoughts of peace, despite the great losses Rome had taken in the war. Approximately 1/5 of the men of military age had died within a few years of Hannibal's invasion. Scipio offered himself as a candidate for reviled in 213 BC alongside his cousin Marcus Cornelius Cethegus. The tribunes of the plebs objected to his candidacy, saying that he could not be allowed to stand because he had not yet reached the legal age. Scipio, already known for his bravery and patriotism, was elected unanimously and the tribunes abandoned their opposition. His cousin also won the election. Campaign in Hispania in 211 BC. Both Scipio's father, Publius Scipio, and uncle, Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Calvus, were killed in battle against Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal Barca, at the election of a new proconsul for the command of the new army which the Romans resolved to send to Hispania. Scipio was the only man brave enough to ask for this position, no other candidates wanting the responsibility. considering it a death sentence. In spite of his youth, his noble demeanor and enthusiastic language had made so great an impression that he was unanimously elected. In the year of Scipio's arrival, all of Hispania south of the Ebro River was under Carthaginian control. Hannibal's brothers Hasdrubal and Maigard, and Hasdrubal Gisco were the generals of the Carthaginian forces in Hispania, and Rome was aided by the inability of these three figures to act in concert. The Carthaginians were also preoccupied with revolts in Africa. Scipio landed at the mouth of the Ebro and was able to surprise and capture Carthago Nova, the headquarters of the Carthaginian power in Hispania. He obtained a rich cache of war stores and supplies, and an excellent harbor and base of operations. Scipio's humanitarian conduct toward prisoners and hostages in Hispania helped in portraying the Romans as liberators as opposed to conquerors. Livy tells the story of his troops capturing a beautiful woman, whom they offered to Scipio as a prize of war. Scipio was astonished by her beauty, but discovered that the woman was betrothed to a Celtiberian chieftain named Lucius. He returned the woman to her fiancé, along with the money that had been offered by her parents to ransom her. This humanitarian act encouraged local chieftains to both supply and reinforce Scipio's small army. The woman's fiancé, who soon married her, responded by bringing over his tribe to support the Roman armies. In 2009 BC, Scipio fought his first set-piece battle, driving back Hasdrubal Barca from his position at Baracula on the upper Guadalquivir. Scipio feared that the armies of Mago and Gisco would enter the field and surround his small army. Scipio's objective was, therefore, to quickly eliminate one of the armies to give him the luxury of dealing with the other two piecemeal. The battle was decided by a determined Roman infantry charge up the center of the Carthaginian position. Roman losses are uncertain but may have been considerable in light of an effort by the infantry to scale an elevation defended by Carthaginian light infantry. Scipio then orchestrated a frontal attack by the rest of his infantry to draw out the remainder of the Carthaginian forces. Hasdrubal had not noticed Scipio's hidden reserves of cavalry moving behind enemy lines, and a Roman cavalry charge created a double envelopment on either flank led by cavalry commander Gaius Laelius and Scipio himself. This broke the back of Hasdrubal's army and routed his forces, an impressive feat for the young Roman versus the veteran Carthaginian general. Despite a Roman victory, Scipio was unable to hinder the Carthaginian march to Italy. Much historical criticism has been leveled at his inability to effectively pursue Hasdrubal, who would eventually cross the Alps only to be defeated by Gaius Claudius Nero at the Battle of the Metaurus. One popular theory for Scipio's failure to pursue Hasdrubal is that Scipio merely wanted the glory of securing Hispania, and an extended mountain campaign would have endangered that. Others cite the Roman soldiers' appetite for plunder as preventing him from rallying in pursuit. The most probable explanation from a strategic standpoint is Scipio's unwillingness to risk being trapped between Hasdrubal's army on one side and one or both of Gisco's and Mago's armies, both of superior numerical strength. Mere days after Hasdrubal's defeat, Mago and Gisco were able to converge in front of the Roman positions, bringing into question what would have happened had Scipio pursued Hasdrubal. After winning over a number of Hispanian chiefs, Scipio achieved a decisive victory in 206 BC over the full Carthaginian levy at Ilipa, which resulted in the evacuation of Hispania by the Punic commanders. After his rapid success in conquering Hispania, and with the idea of striking a blow at Carthage in Africa, Scipio paid a short visit to the Numidian prince Syphax and Massinissa. Numidia was of vital importance to Carthage, supplying both mercenaries and allied forces. In addition to supplying the Numidian cavalry, Numidia operated as as a buffer for vulnerable Carthage. Scipio managed to receive support from both Syphax and Massinissa. Syphax later changed his mind, married the beautiful Carthaginian noblewoman Siphonisba, daughter of Hasdrubal the son of Gisco, and fought alongside his Carthaginian in-laws against Massinissa and Scipio in Africa. On his return to Hispania, Scipio had to quell a mutiny at Sucre which had broken out among his troops. Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal had meanwhile marched for Italy, and in 206 BC Scipio himself, having secured the Roman occupation of Hispania by the capture of Gades, gave up his command and returned to Rome. African campaign. In 2005 BC, Scipio was unanimously elected to consulship at the age of 31. Scipio intended to go to Africa, but due to the envy of others in the Senate, he was not given any additional troops beyond the Sicilian garrison. Despite this resistance, Scipio gathered resources from clients and supporters in Rome and among the Italian communities. This allowed him to muster a volunteer force of 30 warships and 7,000 men. The forces stationed in Sicily at this time included a variety of forces. Interestingly, the Romans had for a long time used service in Sicily as a punishment, with the result that the garrison in Sicily contained survivors from many of the greatest Roman military fiascos in the war, such as the Battle of Cannae. Having served with these men at Cannae, Scipio was well aware that the disgrace was through no fault of their own. In addition, the Sicilian garrison also contained many of the troops who had participated in the Sicilian campaigns of Marcus Claudius Marcellus. For these men, Scipio was able to muster a highly motivated and very experienced force for his African invasion. Scipio turned Sicily into a camp for training his army. Scipio realized that the Carthaginian forces, especially the superior Numidian cavalry, would prove decisive against the largely infantry forces of the Roman legions. In addition, a large portion of Rome's cavalry were allies of questionable loyalty, or noble equites exempting themselves from being lowly foot soldiers. One anecdote tells of how Scipio pressed into service several hundred Sicilian nobles to create a cavalry force. The Sicilians were quite opposed to this servitude to a foreign occupier, and protested vigorously. Scipio assented to their exemption from service providing they pay for a horse, equipment, and a replacement rider for the Roman army. In this way, Scipio created a trained nucleus of cavalry for his African campaign. The Roman Senate sent a commission of inquiry to Sicily and found Scipio at the head of a well-equipped and trained fleet and army. Scipio pressed the Senate for permission to cross into Africa. Some of the Roman Senate, championed by Fabius Maximus Cunctator, opposed the mission. Fabius still feared Hannibal's power and viewed any mission to Africa as dangerous and wasteful to the war effort. Scipio was also harmed by some senators' disdain of his ideals, beliefs, and interests in unconventional areas such as Hellenophile tastes in art, luxuries, and philosophies. All Scipio could obtain was permission to cross over from Sicily to Africa if it appeared to be in the interests of Rome, but not financial or military support. With the permission from the commissioners, Scipio sailed in 204 BC and landed near Utica. Carthage, meanwhile, had secured the friendship of the Numidian Syphax, whose advance compelled Scipio to abandon the siege of Utica and dig in on the shore between there and Carthage. In 203 BC, he destroyed the combined armies of the Carthaginians and Numidians by approaching by stealth and setting fire to the camp, where the combined army became panicked and fled, when they were mostly killed by Scipio's army. Though not a battle, both Polybius and Livy estimate that the death toll in this single attack exceeded 40,000 Carthaginian and Numidian dead, and more captured. Historians are roughly equal in the praise and condemnation for this act. Polybius said, "Of all the brilliant exploits performed by Scipio, this seems to me the most brilliant and more adventurous." On the other hand, one of Hannibal's principal biographers, Theodore Iro Dodge, goes so far to suggest that this attack was out of cowardice and spares no more than a page upon the event in total, despite the fact that it secured the siege of Utica and effectively put Syphax out of the war. The irony of Dodge's accusations of Scipio's cowardice is that the attack showed traces of Hannibal's penchant for ambush. Scipio quickly dispatched his two lieutenants, Lelius and Massinissa, to pursue Syphax. They ultimately dethroned Syphax, and ensured Prince Massinissa's coronation as king of the Numidians. Carthage, and especially Hannibal himself, had long relied upon these superb natural horsemen, who would now fight for Rome against Carthage. War with Hannibal. The Battle of Zama, now deserted by its allies and surrounded by a veteran and undefeated Roman army. Carthage began opening diplomatic channels for negotiation. At the same time, Hannibal Barca and his army were recalled to Carthage, and despite the moderate terms offered to Carthage by Scipio, Carthage suddenly suspended negotiations and again prepared for war. The army that Hannibal returned with is a subject of much debate. Advocates for Hannibal often claim that his army was mostly Italians pressed into service from southern Italy and that most of his elite veterans were spent. Scipio's advocates tend to be far more suspicious and believe the number of veteran forces to remain significant. Hannibal did have a trained pool of soldiers who had fought in Italy, as well as 80 war elephants. Hannibal could boast a strength of around 40,000, 36,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry, compared to Scipio's 29,000 infantry and 6,100 cavalry. The two generals met on a plain between Carthage and Utica on October 19, 202 BC, at the Battle of Zama. Despite mutual admiration, negotiations floundered due largely to Roman distrust of the Carthaginians as a result of the Carthaginian attack on Saguntum, the breach of protocols which ended the First Punic War, and a perceived breach in contemporary military etiquette due to Hannibal's numerous ambushes. Hannibal arranged his infantry in 3 phalangeal lines designed to overlap the Roman lines. His strategy, so oft reliant upon subtle stratagems, was simple. A massive forward attack by the war elephants would create gaps in the Roman lines, which would be exploited by the infantry, supported by the cavalry. Rather than arranging his forces in the traditional manipular lines, which put the hastata, principes, and triarii in succeeding lines parallel to the enemy's line, Scipio instead put the maniples in lines perpendicular to the enemy, a stratagem designed to counter the war elephants. When the Carthaginian elephants charged, they found well-laid traps before the Roman position and were greeted by Roman trumpeters, which drove many back out of confusion and fear. In addition, many elephants were goaded harmlessly through the loose ranks by the velites and other skirmishers. Roman javelins were used to good effect, and the sharp traps caused further disorder among the elephants. Many of them were so distraught that they charged back into their own lines. The Roman infantry was greatly rattled by the elephants, but Massinissa's Numidian and Lelius Roman cavalry began to drive the opposing cavalry off the field. Both cavalry commanders pursued the routing Carthaginian counterparts, leaving the Carthaginian and Roman infantries to engage one another. The resulting infantry clash was fierce and bloody, with neither side achieving local superiority. The Roman infantry had driven off the two front lines of the Carthaginians Carthaginian army, and in the respite took an opportunity to drink water. The Roman army was then drawn up in one long line in order to match the length of Hannibal's line. Scipio's army then marched towards Hannibal's veterans, who had not yet taken part in the battle. The final struggle was bitter and won only when the Allied cavalry rallied and returned to the battlefield. Charging the rear of Hannibal's army, they caused what many historians have called the Roman Cane. Many Roman aristocrats, especially Cato, expected Scipio to raze that city to the ground after his victory. However, Scipio dictated extremely moderate terms in contrast to an immoderate Roman Senate, while the security of Rome was guaranteed by demands such as the surrender of the fleet, and a lasting tribute was to be paid. The strictures were sufficiently light for Carthage to regain its full prosperity. With Scipio's consent, Hannibal was allowed to become the civic leader of Carthage, which the Cato family did not forget. Returned to Rome, Scipio was welcomed back to Rome in triumph with the agnomen of Africanus. He refused the many further honors which the people would have thrust upon him, such as consul for life and dictator. In the year 199 BC, Scipio was elected censor, and for some years afterwards he lived quietly and took no part in politics. In 193 BC, Scipio was one of the commissioners sent to Africa to settle a dispute between Massinissa and the Carthaginians, which the commission did not achieve. This may have been because Hannibal, in the service of Antiochus III of Syria, might have come to Carthage to gather support for a new attack on Italy. In 190 BC, when the Romans declared war against Antiochus III, Publius offered to join his brother Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus if the Senate entrusted the chief command to him. The two brothers brought the war to a conclusion by a decisive victory at Magnesia in the same year. Retirement. Scipio's political enemies, led by Marcus Porcius Cato the Elder, gained ground. When the Scipians returned to Rome, two tribunes prosecuted Lucius on the grounds of misappropriation of money received from Antiochus. As Lucius was in the act of producing his account books, his brother wrested them from his hands, tore them in pieces, and flung them on the floor of the Senate house. Scipio then allegedly asked the courts why they were concerned about how 3,000 talents had been spent, and apparently unconcerned about how 15,000 talents were entering the state coffers. This high-handed act shamed the prosecution, and it appears that the case against Lucius was dismissed, though Lucius would again be prosecuted, and this time convicted, after the death of Scipio. Scipio himself was subsequently accused of having been bribed by Antiochus. By reminding the people that it was the anniversary of his victory at Zama, he caused an outburst of enthusiasm in his favor. The people crowded round him and followed him to the capital, where they offered thanks to the gods and begged them to give Rome more citizens like Scipio Africanus. Despite the popular support that Scipio commanded, there were renewed attempts to bring him to trial, but these appear to have been deflected by his future son-in-law, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus the Elder. It is supposedly in gratitude for this act that Scipio betrothed his youngest daughter Cornelia Africana Minor to Gracchus. Several decades her senior, Scipio retired to his country seat at Liternum on the coast of Campania. He lived there for the rest of his life, revealing his great magnanimity by attempting to prevent the ruin of the exiled Hannibal by Rome. He died probably in 183 BC, aged about 53. His death is said to have taken place under suspicious circumstances, and it is possible that he either died of the lingering effects of the fever contracted while on campaign in 190 BC, or that he took his own life for causes unknown. He is said to have demanded that his body be buried away from his ungrateful city, and the Emperor Augustus is said to have visited his tomb in Liternum more than 150 years later. later. However, it is not certain that he was actually buried at Liternum, and no contemporary accounts of his death or funeral exist. It is said that he ordered an inscription on his tomb, "Ingrata patria, neos acquitum habebis," ungrateful fatherland, you will not even have my bones. Coincidentally, his great rival Hannibal died in Bithynia in the same year or shortly thereafter, also an exile, pursued and harassed to the end by Romans such as Titus Quinctius Flaminianus. Marriage and issue. With his wife Aemilia Paula, daughter of the consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, who fell at Cannae, and sister of another consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus Macedonicus. He had a happy and fruitful marriage. Aemilia Paula had unusual freedom and wealth for a patrician married woman, and she was an important role model for many younger Roman women, just as her youngest daughter Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, would be an important role model for many late Republican Roman noble women, including allegedly the mother of Julius Caesar. Scipio Africanus had two sons. The elder, Publius Cornelius Scipio, was appointed an augur in 180 BC. He never ran for office due to poor health. The younger Lucius Cornelius Scipio became praetors in 174 BC, and was expelled from the Senate by the censors. The elder son Publius adopted his first cousin, his uncle Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a second son, who received the name Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus. Scipio and Aemilia Paula also had two surviving daughters. The elder, Cornelia Africana-Major, married her second cousin Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica Corculum. This son-in-law was a distinguished Roman in his own right. He became consul censor in 159 BC, princeps senatus, and died as Pontifex Maximus in 141 BC. Scipio Nasica rose to many of the dignities enjoyed by his late father-in-law, and was noted for his staunch opposition to Cato the censor over the fate of Carthage from about 157 to 149 BC. They had at least one surviving son. The younger daughter was more famous in history, Cornelia Africana Minor, the young wife of the elderly Tiberius Gracchus Major. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, tribune of the plebs, praetor, then consul 177, became the mother of 12 children, the only surviving sons being the famous Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus. All three surviving children of this union were ill-fated. The brothers Gracchi died relatively young, murdered or forced to commit suicide by more conservative relatives. The eldest child and only surviving daughter, Sempronia, was married to her mother's first cousin Scipio Aemilianus Africanus. The couple had no children, and Sempronia grew to hate her husband after he condoned the murder of her brother Tiberius in 132 BC. Scipio's mysterious death in 129 BC, at the age of 56, was blamed by some on his wife, and by others on his political rivals. Scipio's only descendants living through the late Republican period were the descendants of his two daughters, his sons having died without legitimate surviving issue. His younger daughter's last surviving child, Sempronia, wife and then widow of Scipio Aemilianus, was alive as late as 102 BC. His other known grandson, Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica was far more conservative than his Gracchi cousins. He and his descendants all became increasingly conservative, in stark contrast to the father and grandfathers. Scipio Africanus's eldest grandson, Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica became consul in 138, murdered his own cousin Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus in 132. Scipio Nasica, although Pontifex Maximus was sent to Asia Minor by the Senate to escape the wrath of the Gracchi supporters, and died mysteriously there in Pergamum, and is believed to have been poisoned by an agent of the Gracchi. Scipio's son, the fourth Scipio Africanus, was even more conservative, and rose to be consul in 111 BC. The Scipio Africanus' sons became praetors only shortly before the Marsica War. However, a grandson became the Metellus Scipio, who allied himself with Pompey the Great and Cato the Younger, and who opposed Julius Caesar. Metellus Scipio was the last Scipio to distinguish himself militarily or politically. None of Scipio's descendants, apart from Scipio Aemilianus, his wife's nephew who became his adoptive grandson, came close to matching his political career or his military successes.